Hello, everyone. Welcome to Coffee with Mildred. I'm Maria Erickson. I am doing this project in conjunction with the Cook County Historical Society, and it is a way of helping to allow us to still go have coffee with our relatives, friends, loved ones when we can't physically do it right now, and also to record some of these wonderful stories and history that of Cook County and the people that have lived here. So today I am with Char Anderson, and her granddaughter Heidi is here as well, Heidi Dew, and possibly her daughter Lori is going to join us on the phone. So that might be a little thing that happens in the middle of the interview, and it's okay, people. Don't need to be scared. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to have Amy, my lovely assistant here, move the computer over to Char, and we will get started. Thank you.
I'm going to come around to make sure you're in there. Does that look okay?
In the window.
Don't push any buttons, Brad.
No, I need a Kleenex.
There's our Char.
There's our
And it is recording, Grandma, so watch your language.
What's my language?
No, just let it fly. Show who you really are. So, Char, we had a lovely chat here a few months ago, and I couldn't wait to get back and talk with you, but because of COVID, I've had troubles doing that. But we got to come in today and chat with you.
Yes.
And I had said last time that we were going to pick up in Tofty.
Pick up in Tofty.
Yeah,
Okay.
because you moved out to Tofty. This is after you were married. And how many kids did you have?
6.
Six total.
6 total.
But when you moved to Tofty, did you already have all 6, or did you have more in Tofty?
No. No,
Okay.
that's backwards.
Oh, okay.
When we got married, we drove to Tofty, and I spent the second night after our marriage in Minneapolis at my mother-in-law's house. Fred and I did. And it was Sunday. We were married on Saturday and spent the night in halfway up the Highway 61 and then got to Grand Marais. And we stayed at my mother-in-law's, Walfred and Inga Anderson's, for a month because it was deer hunting season. And she was working for Mrs. Sloan. And so I was in charge of the household of her family and her live-in renter and so on. Monday morning, Fred went to work for Erickson's sawmill, and I was left with a piece of deer to clean the hair off of it because obviously they didn't know how to skin like my dad did.
Oh.
So I spent the day picking off the white skin and the deer hair and made Swiss steak. And I stayed there for a month.
Uh-huh. And you were how old?
I was 16.
Okay.
And I cleaned the coffee pot, which resulted in a nightmare because it had been properly oiled by coffee grounds for 10 years, and I scrubbed the living daylights out of it, so we lost all that wonderful flavoring.
It never pays to wash the coffee pot.
So it always sat on the stove all day long.
Yeah.
And you added water and sometimes some more coffee. Anyway, so that's what I did. And then when season was over, we got a cabin down at Mrs. Olson's. And it was a little tiny kitchen shed added on with a 3-burner propane plate and a sink and a water pail and a couple of shelves. And so that was, and then we had a bedroom and a little living room. And I made it cute. We had a quilt, and I had leftover material from that, so I made curtains for the bedroom, tie backs for the bedroom. And we had an army cot in the living room and enamel table and chairs. Well, the chairs weren't enamel. The tabletop was enamel, wooden chairs. And that was our household, and a stove. And the stove was an old-fashioned wood burner. And at night it would get cold because the fire would go down. So Fred would sneak over to his brother-in-law's who had coal and take a couple of small chunks out of the pile and haul them home and throw them in that stove. And one night he put too large a piece in there, and I woke up and I said, "Yeah, I smell hot. Something is hot." And he got up and he said, "Holy smokes." And he took the water pail and threw it on the wall, and it was just steam. And then he went out and filled it with snow and threw that on. And we got it under control, but it was not a coal burning stove. And of course, we were too dumb to know that, both of us. So anyway, we told Orton, "I won't take any more little pieces of coal ever again." It was scary. So, and it was right after the war. And so we didn't have, my mother had used all my sugar stamps and meat stamps, and Fred's mother had done the same with whoever was living with her that was eligible for stamps. So it was kind of skimpy living for a while.
Yeah.
But thank goodness for Erickson Mill, because that's where Fred started, that's where Fred was working. Until I saw the sawmill, I went out there with Roger, uh, Tormenson's wife, and it was wide open to the air, and they were standing out there, was cold as it could be. Everybody was working, and the mill was going, and Fred was dreamy a lot of times, and I thought, this is not where he should be. But he finished out the winter, and as soon as I could, I said, "We're moving out of here." And he said, I don't know why you would want to do that. And anyway, we had the baby that winter, and in January, and I made it through the first winter and the summer. And the next winter, we moved up on top of the hill. We weren't at Mrs. Olson's anymore. Oh, I skipped a spot. After we were in Mrs. Olson's cabin in the summertime, we moved upstairs at the hotel. And that was also where all the lumberjacks spent the nights in the rooms, and the girls that worked in the restaurant part.
Okay.
So it was kind of an interesting arrangement. I have a picture. The living room was over there, and the kitchen, and the bedroom was way over here down the hall. Anyway, we survived that, and then Tom said that he had this building up on top of the hill that we could rent. And so Fred and I went up there, and it was had formerly been the rabbit hut that I mentioned in the other article.
Yeah. A rabbit hut?
Well, it was looked like a house. It wasn't like a hut, but it was where he had the boxes with the rabbits in, and raised rabbits to sell for meat. Because it was very hard to get any kind of meat at all up the shore. In fact, Jarvis's had one dealer, and Tom Hansen had another. And the word would get out that Jarvis's had a shipment of meat, so everybody would tear up there and try to get whatever was available, hamburger or a steak or whatever. And then the next thing we'd hear, Tom's got meat and eggs. So it was the same. The baby buggy was put to good use because we'd go carrying up the road. Jarvis's is no longer there, but Tom Hansen's is now the big motel on the shore. And it was a grocery store, bar, dance hall, and the hotel.
And where on the shore was this?
Where is that? What's the name of that place?
Oh, Bluefin?
Bluefin Bay.
Okay.
That was Tom Hansen's area.
Okay.
And he had cabins eventually.
Yep.
And in the meanwhile, his mother from Norway was there, Bestamore, and she babysat their little ones. Well, Tom ran the store, and his wife Madeline ran the restaurant. So in the summertime, I got a job as a waitress, and I take the baby in the buggy with me and wait tables. And my first experience with the gentlemen's lumberjacks, I knew about them because my Uncle Delmer had a camp. Anyway, I had gone grocery shopping. It was before Vicky was born. And it was snowing. It was January, and it was cold and snowing. And so Tom had bagged up my groceries, and I was going to walk back to Celia Olson's cabin. And all of a sudden, he picked up my bags, and I thought, well, I'm not going to argue with him. He had been in some sort of a battle. He had bad scars on his cheeks. Anyway, I just took off for the house, and he walked along behind me. He didn't say anything, and I didn't say anything. And I thought, if he takes my groceries, that's fine. I don't care. And when I got home, he set him down on the steps, and he said, pregnant women shouldn't be carrying stuff, and turned around and went back to the store.
Aww.
And he was such a nice man. Ever after that, I always would talk to him when I'd see him. And years later, when I started working, one of the nurses that lived out in that area, said that she was still taking care of him. Godfrey Dahl was his name, and he was an artist.
Oh.
Yeah, and he spoke very broken English. Anyway, back to where was I? Oh, we were up in the rabbit hut. Tom had 3 colors of paint. He had pink, and he had blue, and he had white. So we taped the walls, and we used a bread knife to smooth the plaster on, let it dry, and then we painted. And our rooms were all cheerful colors. A little bit bright yellow, but that was all right. That was the kitchen. So that's how we lived till the fall and the summer when David was a baby. And I just couldn't believe Fred was still working under those conditions. And I called Leonard Gilbertson one day. I said, do you actually move people with your truck if you're not using it for something else? And he said, yeah, I sure do. And I said, well, I want to move. I want to move to my grandparents' farm in Grand Marais. And I'd like to do it as soon as possible. And he said, well, when would you like to do it? I said, today. Okay. So he came over and we started loading. We didn't have a great deal of things, but we had potty chairs and cribs and rollaway and our bedding and our dishes and our kettles. And so when he got them mostly loaded on the truck, he said, now does Fred know about this? I said, he will when he gets home. So Fred came home and the truck was there and everything was all cut and dried and he couldn't believe it. We moved to town and he got a job on the boats in the harbor right away. And Delmer, my uncle, said he's not going to last. It's a terrible job. They're down in the hole arranging all those pulp logs that are thrown in. They have to get them piled so that the weight is distributed evenly for the big boats. And Fred lasted all summer. And he came home with calloused hands, but he had a good paycheck. And then after that, he got a job helping build a house not a house, it was more of a mansion in Minneapolis on Lake Minnetonka.
Uh-huh.
And we lived in a little teeny 1-room cabin. So I moved from my grandparents' 2-story, 4-bedroom house to this little cabin in Minnetonka with the 2 kids. But we arranged things so that they fit.
Yeah.
And my mom and dad went down there at the same time. And were in the cabin next to us, which was about 9 feet apart, about as far as you and I. And she'd open her window and say, I hear the kids, get up. The kids were saying, I'm hungry, I want breakfast, or Vicky was.
Yeah.
So that's how we lived for 2 years. But he had a really good job with Bob Zimmerman. It was a log building, and it was a man that had a shoemaking business.
Okay.
And so that was quite an experience for me to live in the city, and I didn't like it. I said I never want to live in a city again, and I haven't. I've always had out of town. I mean, I did live in Grand Marais, but it was a small town compared to everything else.
So where did you come back up here then after Minnetonka?
Yeah, we did every. I came every summer, and Fred would work, and I'd be in the farmhouse. And my dad and mother would take care of me if I needed groceries. Dad would come and get me and take me to the store. I didn't drive, and actually, I didn't drive until I was in my 40s. Well, I did, but illegally. I took the kids partridge hunting and so on back roads, and but I wouldn't drive in town. So, but as far as my top,
Who did Dad work under to apprentice for carpentry? Was that Mr. Erickson?
No, that was working in the mill. Your dad worked for Bob Zimmerman, and when he was working for Minnesota before Wanda was born was when the tree fell on him, and that's when he took the course through the mail.
Okay.
Yeah.
You took a course through the mail?
Through the mail. They sent him books, and then he had questions to answer. And Auntie Rachel was a mathematics teacher, and Fred was doing geometry and all of the carpentry measurements that are required to be a carpenter. And you had to answer the questions. Sometimes they gave you the answer, but you had to work it to the answer, and you couldn't get that one page. And so we went out to Rachel's, and she said, just leave it with me. And she worked on it, and she brought it back, and she said, I couldn't get it either, Fred. I don't know what the problem is. So he sent it in, and it was kind of a trick question. They had made a mistake, but they hadn't made a mistake. They had worked it so it wasn't workable. And that he had found it. He said, I cannot work this, and neither can the math teacher. And they said, good, because it's not workable.
You're not supposed to be able to work it.
Right. So that was interesting, but it frustrated him.
Yeah.
Then at that time, we were living in this little cabin of Bloomberg's, and it was 3 rooms, but the bathroom was so tiny. There was a corner shower, toilet seat, and a sink. But 2 people couldn't be in there at once. And that's where he studied. He'd put the lid down, sit on the toilet, and then set up the card table on 2 legs. And the minute he got established, one of the kids needed the bathroom. So he'd have to fold it up and step out. And I don't know how he was able to complete that course, but he did. And it was a very popular program of, you could take many courses besides carpentry through that. And all of the material came in little blue books so he graduated from that, and they were building the new high school. And he went up and asked for a job, and the foreman said, I'd like to know what you can do. And Fred said, I can do almost anything. I've taken this course. And so he said, Fred said, I will work for a week. And if you're pleased with what I do, then I expect to be paid. But you don't have to pay me for the first week. And so the next day he had him setting doors. And the next morning when he came to work, he had the foreman had a small carpenter's box, and he went around and he said, you don't need 2 hammers, and you don't need that, and you don't need this. And he filled it for Fred. He said, you're hired. He said, nobody else has been able to hang the doors like you can.
Oh, my.
So he got on right away, and that was when Taconite Harbor was busy. And so every Friday night they all came into town to cash their checks and stuff. And so that was a very good job till it was done. Then he got hired by Backlund. and he worked there until he decided to be his own contractor.
Okay.
And at that point, we were living up in C.O. Johnson's house that we had bought up in Rosebush, which I absolutely loved. It was like my grandparents' house, only bigger and better, and I just loved it. And we bought it. And we
That house is on the historical register at the museum.
C.O.
C.O. Johnson's house.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Is that the one Kathy Finn lives in now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah,
Mhm.
that is a wonderful house.
Yep. And it's been rented several times, and there have been, not rented, sold, and there has been some radical changes inside since we lived there. And there's a story that my mother-in-law told me. Never go back to your original home because it'll break your heart. And she's right. Some of the changes really made me feel bad, but it wasn't ours anymore.
Right.
And you have to let go of things, and I did. But it had bird's eye maple flooring downstairs, first grade, and second grade bird's eye upstairs, plastered walls, and baseboards that were a foot and a half high. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And when we were fixing things, Fred said, "My goodness, all this bookcases and stuff were bought through Montgomery Ward." On the boards, it's Montgomery Ward.
Yeah.
And so you ordered your house, literally,
Through a magazine.
through a catalog,
Yeah.
Montgomery Ward. Okay, so I'm jumping. I know I am from subject to subject. You asked about Tofty.
Yeah. Tofty.
Okay, it was fun living there, and I was inexperienced, so anything I did that turned out, I was thrilled, and the stuff that I wasn't thrilled with, Fred let me know. It wasn't a success, and I didn't need to do it again. Anyway, by the time we moved out of Tofty, we had the two children, and then we hit Graham Ray again, and lived in various houses.
So in Tofty, you told me last time, Irene Netland,
Toots Netlin, yeah,
Toots.
Eileen,
was one of your,
Wanda's godmother.
okay.
Okay, and she was we were godparents for two of her children, Fred and I. Anyway, she would bake bread and everything that had crumbs in it, cake crumbs, cookie crumbs, banana bread crumbs, went into the dough. So every batch of bread was different, but every batch of bread was good. And just having a slice of her homemade bread. And she went on to have innumerable children. I think she's ended up with 13, but I'm not sure.
Yep.
But we were godparents for Rosie and Robert.
Okay. And occasionally you would have to take care of her husband or something when she would.
Sven, when she had another baby, she said, "Can you take care of Danny, Janet, and Sven? Uh, Can you be there? Because Sven goes to work at the mill, the same as Fred." And I said, "Yes, I can do that. Not like you do it." And she's, "Well, he doesn't like hot dishes. He doesn't like wieners. He doesn't like blah, blah, blah." And I thought, well, that's just too darn bad. I'm here and he's going to have to eat what I make. And he made pancakes on Sunday, Swedish pancakes, and filled a drawer. And that was breakfast for the week for everybody. You just reached in there and pulled out a couple of pancakes and spread butter and jelly or peanut butter, whatever you wanted on it. And they didn't mold, which really surprised me because when they're damp.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was something.
And just threw them in a drawer. No
Yeah.
saran wrap back then,
No,
or
no,
tin foil, or
Right? No, it was a bread drawer.
yeah.
And he made them. He was good at it, and so I was relieved of any work on Sunday because he'd be home. And Monday there they'd be in the drawer, and the kids would just dive in and pull out a
Pancake.
pancake, and make their own breakfast.
Oh my goodness.
And what else did we do? Okay, and
Well, Toots came to us a couple times up at the farm.
once she spent time after she had a baby. Oh, that was fun. Fred said, "You're not going home, Toots. You didn't get enough rest, and you need to rest." I think it was her 11th, 10th, maybe. It was a little girl anyway, cute as a button. And so she said, "Well, I have to go home." He said, "No, you don't. You can come up to the farm and spend as many days as you want to with Char and I and the baby. And Slim can manage for himself. He's retired, and your youngest one he can handle." And so she did. And I told her one day, I told her to go upstairs and rest. And I said, I'll be down in the kitchen and I'll hear you. And I'll keep the baby down here. And she breastfed all of her kids. And so the baby was in the big chair in the living room. And I went in there and looked at her, and she had cookie crumbs all around her mouth. And Elton was just little, and I grabbed him. I said, "Elton, you didn't feed the baby cookies, did you?" And he said, "No, Mommy, I just kissed her."
Oh,
So that was so cute. Anyway, is that what you wanted me to tell? She's gone.
Yes, that was a sweet story.
Yeah, just kissed her. So Toots stayed for 4 days, I believe. And
I thought it was a week.
no, I don't think so. It may have felt like it because you weren't a baby anymore.
Oh, I love that baby.
Anyway, what are you doing?
I'm making it so you stay warm, Grandma. You're making me cold looking at you.
I'm
It's
not
all
cold.
bundled up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, what else? Give me a kicker, Lori.
Well, I mean, Toots wasn't the only friend or whatever that would come and stay with us
Oh, Lucy
at the
Frogner.
farm.
Lucy Frogner, my most wonderful friend in the world.
Who is she?
Yes.
Dr. Frogner's wife. And Dr. Frogner was a government doctor up here for the CCC camp. And just outside of Grand Marais, where that new church is, in the restaurant,
Yeah.
there's a White House in the back that belonged to Beebe's. And that's where she lived. He was in the service during World War II. And because he was a doctor and they needed him desperately, she was alone. And she had 2 little boys, Peter and Carl. And I was their nanny when Dr. Frogner was here, because he'd get called out all hours of the day and night. And she was a nurse. And so there were some cases she would need to go with. Anyway, I did that from 11 until I was 15, worked for them. And when he was in service, I was her support. And she and I just clicked. And we did to the bitter end until she died. And
That's where you got the medical journals from, Mom, that you read.
yeah,
Yeah.
they were all in the basement, all of Frog's books. So when I was babysitting, I'd just go down and open a box and read up on whatever I felt I could absorb. And did that for years. And thank goodness he never wanted to read them again when he got back. So because they had gotten damp, so when I'd open them, sometimes 2 or 3 pages would pull open. Anyway, she was pregnant with Gene when he went overseas with Gene Ellen. And Jean arrived, and she was named after Lucy's sister-in-law, and she brought her home, and I was thrilled because now we had a baby. Carl John was absolutely the most lovely child I ever took care of, including my own, and Peter was a holy terror. So I never knew what he was up to. Anyway, Carl was just a gentle little boy, and Gene Ellen was fine. And Lucy went to meet him when he was released from the service. He was captured during the Battle of the Bulge. And because he was a doctor, he said he received better treatment than the average captured man.
Okay.
And she went to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and left me with the kids, all 3 of them. I said, "Lucy, are you sure I can handle it?" "Yeah." She said, "I've seen you all these years that you've been the nanny, and you can do as good as I could do." So I took care of a baby and 2 little boys, and they all survived. my cooking and my care. Anyway, I don't know how exactly, but they did. And housekeeping was not high priority for her. So care of the kids was basically what I did, and laundry.
Yeah.
And Peter got into the lipstick one nap time and smeared it all over the windowsill and all over this beautiful, beautiful quilt that she'd gotten in Kentucky to go with her maple bedroom set. And so I thought, well, I'll fix it. I'll just wash it. So I went down in the basement. The water was hard there, and put the Fels naphtha soap in and the quilt and washed it and hung it out on the lines. My mother stopped over and she said, "What did you do today?" And I told her about Peter, and she said, "You washed it." I said, "Yes." "Oh my goodness, you aren't supposed to wash those quilts." And she went out to the clothesline and looked at it, and she came back and she said, "It looks okay, but I thought it would be nothing but a bunch of rags." So Lucy didn't even know when she came back that I had washed it. So it turned out fine. But that was all cloth diapers and so on. So taking care of those kids was, I think Carl was pretty much trained, but of course wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And so
When did you work at Lang's, Mom?
when I was in high school. And
Okay.
I think every girl in Cook County worked at Lang's
Oh yeah.
at the soda fountain.
Yeah.
And where Aaron had the restaurant and soda fountain, that's where I worked in high school. And so did Dolores, my best friend Dolores Winterstrom, and Joanne Staples, and innumerable girls worked there. Not all at the same time, but we had shifts. I also worked at Mabel's Cafe when the telephone system was being set in. There was a uh, what would you call it?
A relay station? A switchboard?
No, there was a troupe of professional telephone installer cable layers that arrived, and so they'd come to Mabel's Cafe for breakfast every day, and I was on the morning shift, and they'd all sit at one table, and then they'd all order something different just to confuse me. I want them poached, I want them fried, I want them over easy, and I would just be like a madwoman by the time I was done with that table, and they got more fun out of it if they could confuse me.
I hope they tipped you well.
I doubt it very much. I know my Uncle Delmer left 2 pennies under his pancake plate, and that was my tip. So if you were going to live on tips, you'd starve.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So where did you meet Dad?
where'd I meet Dad? Okay. I was walking with my friend Gloria over to Joe Jarvis. That would be Ray Jarvis's uncle or father, I don't know which, to a dance in high heels, and it was in the winter, and he was sliding on the hill that's now behind Holiday and the church. But those buildings weren't there. So it was a beautiful long hill from the cemetery down. And he was sliding with his buddy up there, and he came down to the fence and he said, "Why don't you come and play with us guys?" And I said, "I don't play with kids," and just kept on going. And he said that made him so mad, he decided he was going to try again and see if he could convince me to come and play with that kid. And so eventually he did. And we went together from when I was 14 and a half until we got married.
At 16.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. We got married in Minneapolis at Eleanor Mackenzie's house. And
Your cousin.
my cousin, yes. Well, no, that's where the reception was. We were married at the minister's house, and Fred gave him a $5 bill for performing the service, and he gave it back. He said, "I think you fellows could use it more than I could." So
It's interesting. I mean, weddings seem to be back when you got married were done in people's homes. You didn't have the big church wedding or
not under the circumstances, I was expecting Vicky.
yeah.
So I wore my cousin's suit. It was a gray and darker gray stripe button up the front, but that's not exactly comfortable. So the minute we got back to the house, I took it off and put my what now would be called a muumuu. And so Fred was teasing me shortly before he died. The styles came out with the tops, loose tops to wear with your jeans.
Yeah.
And he said, you spent most of your life in the smocks and now you're back in them again. What's going on? I said, they're comfortable. So anyway, he'd like to tease. And we managed to stay together for 65 years, just shy of 65 before he passed away.
And it was all roses the whole
Oh,
time.
yeah, right. Yeah. There were some pretty violent upsets because he had a drinking problem. And I knew it, and I know he knew it. But the company kept, that was what they did after work, was stop down at the lounge. And then it became a habit, and then it became more than that. And I was to the point where the kids were raised, except for Elton. He was 15, but he was the youngest, and of course, he was a little bit spoiled. And anyway, the older children decided that they needed to uh, confront their father with the problem. And they did, David in particular, and he spent the whole day talking to him. Fred had gotten intoxicated the night before and couldn't remember where he left the car. And so he walked home and on County Road 7, and he missed the road 6 that goes up to our place, and he ended up down on the Rosebush Creek on top of the ice. And he said what woke him up was the sound of the water running underneath him. If it had been a little later in the year, he would have fallen through.
Yeah.
And so he got up the hill and home, and he was half frozen. Anyway, and then David unexpectedly turned up and started talking with them in the living room. David and his wife and Brandon.
Mom, you had called out that
Yeah,
David and others that the situation was worse and worse. So Vicki and Jean and David and Jane with
not David and Jane. Yeah, David and Jane.
and Wanda was not there, but Aaron and I think Elton were all there. And
Aaron-
Dad was on.
Aaron didn't come. Aaron didn't come. He was cooking at Graham Portage, and he said, no, I won't do it. So he wasn't there. But you were, and David. And David,
Yeah, and Vicki and Jean.
no. Vicki and
Yep.
Jean, no, they were not. Believe me, it was David and Brandon and me and you. That was it. Vicki and Jean did not come up. So David did the counseling or the intervention, and he did it all day long. And he had said to Dad, now you know that Mother doesn't need this big house. If you decided to build a house for her, you'd hire a contractor or an architect. And that's what we're asking you to do. You need help to deal with this health problem that you have. And he thought he had him. And then Fred said, no, I wouldn't. I would not. I would draw my own. I don't need an architect. I know what she wants or what we want. So David was like shot down. He had run out of persuasion things. And so he came to the doorway, and Fred was sitting in the chair looking very unapproachable. And David was standing in the archway between the hallway and the living room. And Brandon crawled across the floor because he was just a baby, and he was standing with his hand on Fred's knee and looking up at him. And David was in tears, and he said, Dad, I remember the good times, and I'd like them back again. And it was just like all of a sudden something exploded in Fred's face. And he said, all right. And he walked up the steps, and it was like each step was 3 feet high. He was that, what would be the word? He was that.
Depressed.
No, he wasn't depressed. He was relieved, but he was tired. I mean, he hadn't slept the night before except on the ice and a few hours after that. And he was exhausted, and he had spent the day fighting what was inevitable. So we left that night and drove, and then Lori drove and David drove. You drove Dad, right? No,
Well-
David drove Dad.
I think you need to back up just a little bit because, Brandon was crawling over to Grandpa and David said those words. Dad said that he said, it's too late. It's too late. Too much. My kids are all grown. And Jane said, David's wife, Jane said, I have 6 good reasons. We have 6 good reasons. One is by your leg for you to get well. And that was the picture.
Yeah.
Was David's little Brandon was, the most recent grandchild.
Right.
So, and then we knew that we needed to move. And so we did drive down.
Right.
And you drove with me, and David had Dad, but I think you and I had Jane and the kid and Brandon. So we drove down, and then we came home that night after we dropped Dad off at the detox center. So
Well, first we went to Mildred-Char, and David went in and to see where you registered, and they said, no, you can't come here. You have to go to detox. Well, where is that? It's in St. Luke's Hospital. So we had to backtrack from Mildred-Char to St. Luke's, and David went, and I went in with Fred, and it was a very depressing sight. And we met young people from Graham Ray that we didn't have any knowledge of them being there. And Fred said he didn't believe he belonged there until the second day. And he said he was so shaky he could hardly hold a cigarette. And so they kept him for 5 days, and then he went to Mildred-Char. And then I couldn't talk to him or see him for 2 weeks. And then he called me, and he said, Char, my clothes, I've shrunk them all. And I said, what? I've shrunk all my clothes. He'd never washed clothes since he married me. And I said, you couldn't have. Well, they feed him, and there's candy on every corner to replace the alcohol. And so he was eating candy between immense meals. And he got selected to go down and get meals for all the rest that weren't allowed to leave the floor yet. The first week you had your meals delivered, and you didn't go anyplace other than the meetings. And so he got the job of going down and getting meals. And he was in the elevator, and they brought him up, and he said, oh my, it smells so good in here. And the aide that was standing there said, I'll bet, what floor are you from? And he said, 4. And she said, well, this is alcohol that I clean the stainless steel with, and that's why it smells so good. And said he knew then, truly, he must be an alcoholic because it really smelled good.
Oh, jeez. So
Anyway,
what year was that?
what year was that?
1976.
Yeah, 76. Right. And so that was our.
He was there for 7 weeks.
Mhm. And many counseling sessions, and then there was family week, and I was invited, of course, to be there. And any of the children that wanted to go, well, they didn't want to go. So Elton had come to visit, but he just lost it when he saw his dad. Oh, when I went to see him the first time, I thought, how will I find him? And I got up on 4th floor. I said, I know. I'll look for the worst looking bed, because he didn't make beds either. And I was walking all along, and they all looked pretty good to me. And I said, oh, who taught you how to make beds? And he said, no, I paid my partner. He was in the Navy. He said, you can bounce a quarter off the bed. He paid his counselor to make his bed. Not every day, but that day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it was stressful. It was a week of meetings that I went to, and I stayed with his brother, Claude. It also happened to be the same time that Claude and Mary Lou had their first child. So it was a wild and crazy week, but we lived through it. And when we left, Fred said, I'll never be back in there again. And I said, I hope not. Well, he said, you don't need a hope. I'm done. I will never be back in there again. Not that it was so bad, but I saw myself. And I said, tell me about that. And he said, well, I was laying in bed sleeping, and my buddy in the other bed was sleeping. And all of a sudden, I was in this cage, and I couldn't get the cage loose. And he said, I was down on the floor trying to get the grill off the heating system. And my buddy called the nurse's desk, and they said, what were you doing? And he said, I was in there and I could see me, but I couldn't get the grate loose. And then I did. And what an amazing revelation I thought that was, that it was a physical barrier that he couldn't overcome.
Great imagery.
Yeah.
So what in 1976, what was having a husband who's an alcoholic? I mean, was it something that was talked about then, or did you all have to pretend that it wasn't really a thing, or?
Well, we embraced it.
We knew that he was an alcoholic. I mean, we had known it for years. My father would come home and he would say to my mother, well, his truck is down there again. Or I guess Fred's down there again. I saw his truck. And so then I went to tell him what had happened at our house after Lori and I got back. And my dad said, oh, no. Was that necessary? And my mother jumped on him and she said, Ralph, finally somebody's doing something. And she said, all you ever said was he's at it again. Well, that didn't help anything. And so my dad got chastised for not encouraging what was going on. And he and I mother had gone someplace. And so my dad and I drove to Duluth to pick her up. And, but we were there way early. My dad didn't want to leave anything to chance. When my mother got off the bus, we better be there. And so we had time. And so I said, let's go see Fred at Mildred-Char. And so we walked up there from the bus depot because we'd found a parking spot. So my dad said, leave it alone. We've got a parking spot. So we walked.
It was tough in the 70s too, huh?
So we walked all the way up there, and my dad said to him, Fred, wouldn't you like to come outside with us and walk on the sidewalk? No. I told myself I will not leave this place until I leave it for good. So my dad was astounded. He said, it's so nice out. No, I will not go out of here until I'm done. So I don't know how we got to that so fast, because that was sort of the finale of all the.
It was only 1976, Grandma.
Yeah,
Not
we
the
still have
finale.
a bunch of years left, and we're kind of closing in on the time of when this interview needs to be done.
Okay.
So,
And I would like to interject that it was not all roses after that, but like Mom's expressed that it changed Dad in the sense that he had a bigger purpose. He'd always had a purpose, but the sobriety was very, very important to him. But he also had, alcoholism, and you can have dry drunks, and you can have mood swings, and you can have depression, and all of those things that contribute to that. So the struggle was real and continued, and they just weathered it all beautifully.
Well, I had to recognize what was going on, and it wasn't always easy. Now what have I done? It would be the first thought. I must have done something because he's in a snit. But he didn't recognize it, that he had a temperamental change. So it was something to be resolved over the years. And I said we had 30 years of misery, most of it. And we had 35 years of good years, most of it. But leaving Tofty was to our benefit, because all that was out there was liquor and bad jobs in the woods. And he was almost killed once with a falling tree, and I had to get him out of there. So I did.
clearly, in a day.
Well, Leonard's face just fell when I said he will know when we get home because he thought, oh boy, I'll be unloading. I know Fred, I'll be putting everything back. But there wasn't that much stuff. So
I think what really amazes me about your family, coming from a Finnish, quiet family that doesn't talk about anything, is how much you guys have all worked together and communicated and talked things out. And just because we're mad doesn't mean everything's over.
mm-mm.
But we'll talk it out, and it'll get to a better place. And
In part, there was lots that we didn't address that we didn't know how to, and we had to just let that go. So I learned a lot while he was in treatment and the family week. And the counselor confronted me when I sat down. He nailed me and he looked at me and he said, Mrs. Anderson, how come you have such hard eyes? And I said, if you haven't let yourself cry for this length of time, you have hard eyes. And that made me think about how I presented myself right from the start. Well, then he was so confrontational, not only to me, but to other people. And that, of course, is part of the job. But what he said when we started is, I never drank and I don't smoke, so there will be no smoking here. Well, that he ended up with you at a room full of alcoholics that were also smokers, and they used the cigarettes continuously. So everybody was on the edge of their chair. But he eyeballed me first. And so Fred's personal counselor had me come and talk to him the next day. And he said, you're going to have a new counselor. That one didn't fit with anybody in that group. So I don't want you to quit. Because I told Fred, I can't come back if that's what's going to happen. I'm willing to admit things, but I don't want to be made a spectacle of in front of everybody. Anyway, he said, but I want to talk to you. He said, I'll tell you one thing. If Fred ever goes back to drinking again, get the kids and get the hell away from there because he's the most dangerous person in the world at that point. I said, what do you mean? He's failed himself. And he said, remember that. If he ever drinks, he has failed himself. So I'm glad I had the time to talk to him about that. And no, I can't say that. There was a physician that I talked with, and he was faced with the same problem, and he hadn't heard that particular thing. So I told him, and he realized it was true. Anyway, I thank you for asking me, and I have lots more crazy stories to tell.
I can't wait. I'm gonna go walk out the door and make my next appointment with you and chatting. And Lori and I better start making a list so we know what to spur her on with.
We will. Lori will be home, and we will be able to do that.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you guys. Hi, Lori.
Hi, sweetie. Mom?
Yeah.
All right.
She said you're wonderful. You did a good job.
Thanks for joining us on
Right
Coffee
on,
with
Jill.
Mildred.
Talk to
If
you
you
later.
like this,
I
hit
love
the
you.
like and subscribe button and join us for more because Char's got some crazy stories that she's going to share with us soon. So thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you.
Just so you know, Maria, you can't get away with anything in front of Grandma. If I am out of sorts, she will call me out